all here to listen to Pippa, my wife, and the results of her research into our residence and its significance to Irish history and Irish literature. We're delighted that we can support Dublin City's Festival of History, and that will run for a month, and the full program of the Festival of History is beautifully produced in this book and available online and in an app, and is simply a terrific immersion in the wonderful history of this city and of this country. So we congratulate the organisers of this event for putting on such a diverse series of presentations and conversations. In particular, we'd like to thank the Nocton family for making the Marion available to us for this event. It's a generous gesture, it's a wonderful gesture, it's an appropriate gesture, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We're pleased that so many people have shown an interest in this presentation, and of course it will be followed by Pip's second presentation, exactly the same format, same content, same delivery. If you finish the presentation in here and would like to get a cup of tea in the beautiful surrounds of the Marion, please do so. And while you do that, you'll also have the opportunity to see some of the wonderful art that's part of the Marion collection, much of which relates to Harry Clarke. There's a particularly beautiful painting by Clarke's wife of Clarke that hangs on display just over here. I'll ask you before Pippa starts to please put your phones on silent. Please make sure that you do collect your copy of the program. You won't regret it, and you won't regret going to other parts of the extensive program that's put on for the enjoyment of people interested in Irish history. And I know for sure that you won't regret being here to listen to the terrific research that has been done by wonderful Pippa.
Thanks, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here as a part of the Dublin Festival of History. And I'd really like to thank David Curran and Margarita Capon, who are here today, who encouraged me to do this. And I wouldn't have done it without your encouragement, so I really appreciate it. David Curran is a stained glass art historian and knows lots more about stained glass than me. So if you have any questions at the conclusion, it'll be David that will be able to answer any stained glass related questions. And Margarita is from the Dublin City Council and is the person that's leading the creation of the Harry Clarke Museum, which is a wonderful project, and I think will be, I think just the demand to come to this presentation in itself speaks to the interest that people have in this particular artist, and it will be a wonderful addition to the many tourist attractions for locals and for visitors in the city. So I think that's a wonderful initiative. We moved here in 2020, and it was in the middle of lockdown, and we moved into an amazing grand mansion on 3 acres in Killiney. And the light in the rooms, the windows are all south facing, and the light that comes through these beautiful reception rooms is just breathtaking. And I really became curious about who built this house. So I started Googling, and so two things really came up. First of all, the work of the best known art historian on Harry Clarke stained glass art is Dr. Nikki Gordon-Bow. Unfortunately, she passed away before we moved here, so I never had the chance to meet her, but her research is so thorough and her footnoting is so detailed that I now know more about Harry Clarke than I probably care to, but I've been able to go down rabbit holes as a result of her footnotes, which have led me to references about the house. And although she's passed, and it's a real shame that I never got to meet her. Her husband and her daughter have been very supportive of this research that I've been doing and using her work to support this research as a launch pad. And I'm really pleased that Nikki's daughter, Venetia's coming to the repeat lecture this afternoon to hear this talk. The other thing, I'm just going to do a little shout out to a neighbour of mine in Killiney. He's a retired architect. Michael McShane is he's not here. He might be coming later, or he might be coming to the next lecture. I can't remember, but he's built a website called killineyhistory.ie, and it's a wonderful resource for anyone with an interest, but obviously people in the local community who have an interest in the development of Killiney. He actually has a special interest in maps, and he has all of the old maps overlaid which you can zoom through in time and see how the boundaries change and how the area develops. It's actually really interesting. And you know, on here is a story about how the gardener got shot by the IRA near Bono's house, for example, in 1920. I'm not going to be talking about that today, but this is the sort of thing that really hooked me in terms of doing research. So today I'm going to be talking about the owners of the house and their Harry Clarke connection. And I'm also, because this is a Dublin Festival of History event, I'm also going to be relating it to parts of Dublin City that relate to this story too, because these men all had townhouses and they certainly enjoyed life here in Dublin. I've also, so I've covered that. What I'm presenting to you today is purely about these men and their Harry Clarke connection. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, both of them were politicians in Dublin City, so I'll go into a little bit about their political backgrounds. But this Harry Clarke connection, I've written a book, and this only represents 20% of the history that I've uncovered. And I'm hoping to launch that at the Torquay Book Festival next year. So I'm actually in the editing phase of the book. So if anyone is interested in obtaining that book and you weren't the person that registered on Eventbrite, if you'd like to leave your email address at the front desk as you leave, that way I can get in touch with you as to when I actually finish it. Okay, so this is a map that's from killineyhistory.ie, and the house was originally called Marino, and these boundaries haven't changed very much. There's a few things that I'm going to point out to you. First of all, this little parcel of land here, this is the main gate, is here on Killiney Hill Road, and a long driveway in. This has since been carved off, and there's a little house on here. This is a map from 1888. This got carved off in the 1930s in Sir Robert Wood's time. I'll be talking about Sir Robert Wood's. So this has never been a part of the Australian Embassy. I'd also just like to point out this beautiful sort of patchwork design in the back garden. A garden historian has told, or a couple of garden historians have told me that this is like a garden room, and each square would provide you with a different view of the sea. So just to give you a sense of perspective, the waters are blocked down here. Now the other thing that I'll point out to you is this vacant block, which provided beautiful views, clear views over Braehead and the Wicklow Mountains in 1888. This block got sold off before the Australian government purchased the house. So this is the same map, but today, and You can see the shape's still there. This has been cut off, and there's a house here. So the views are not as outstanding. There's more glimpses from upstairs. There's also a beautiful glass house at the back of the house. And although the detail isn't there, that patchwork design is still there in the back garden. And something which I'll show you later, but had inspired Harry Clarke's work. Okay, so today this is just a quick outline of who's owned the house. And as I say, the house was called Marino up until 1950 when Lady Talbot de Malahide changed its name. I won't be talking about that today either, but from then on it's been known as Abbey Lea. I'm going to be focusing on these two gentlemen here, Laurence Waldron and Sir Robert Woods and his wife Lady Margaret. I'm also just going to talk briefly about the Chater family. They had 30 acres, and although the family were lawyers, stockbrokers, they were clearly property developers. And if I go back to this map, they built Abbey Lands, they built Mentone, for those people that live in Killiney that are here, they built Mentone, they built Bonavista, which has since been knocked down but is just north of us on Killiney Hill Road. So they were absolute property developers, but and they built Campanella as well, which is at the end of Marino Avenue West here. But the family had always lived here. Now, the house was sold in 1898 to Laurence Waldron, and he bought it off his stockbroker mate. These men were both stockbrokers, and Joshua Chater was the third generation to live in that house. They were both stockbrokers, and this is their townhouses on Anglesey Street in Temple Bar. So this is Larky's townhouse is directly opposite the Dublin Stock Exchange, and although you can't see it in this photograph, it says remodelled in 1898. So the year that he bought Marino, the year this new facade was put on and completely new fit out, and that was done by his cousin who was an architect called Laurence MacDonald, and his nickname was Lau, and they were really good mates. Now, on the same street, this is on the opposite side of the street, a little bit further down. This is Joshua Chater's townhouse. So both of them are in this beautiful Queen Anne Revival style with this gorgeous oriel window at the first floor. I've met a lovely old gentleman who lives in Dorking. His name is Robert Lambkin, and he was a stockbroker in here, and his father worked for Larky Waldron. In fact, this is Larky Waldron's chair out the front, which Gary and I have had restored. So if you want to come and have a seat later, you're more than welcome. It's a beautiful chair. It's called a library chair, and you sit in it and hold a book, lean back and hold a book in front of your face to read. So it's actually very comfortable. But Mr. Lambkin tells me that the bottom floor's for business. First floor is the drawing room, where you'd be entertaining over lunch. The second floor is your own private bedrooms, and top floor's for the butler. I've been told that this is one of the oldest townhouses in Temple Bar, so it's really worth, the next time you're in Temple Bar, having a little look. The Irish Architectural Archive is a fabulous resource, and there's a whole box by MacDonald Reid, which was the architecture firm that Laurence MacDonald was a part of. This says elevation to suit number 6 plans, but this is one of many drawings that he had done for the facade of Marino, as it was known at the time. So we believe there was a fire in 1909, and that precipitated the remodelling. Everything to the east of the door is original downstairs, that's easily told just by the thickness of the walls. and there's quite a distinctive difference in the design. But I mean, there was even a design for a ballroom at this end of the house with a beautiful a patio on top. I mean, and there's these women with hats and parasols that he's drawn in. It's just incredible. Now, this is Ely Place, which is very, very close to us here at the Merrion. In fact, if you go out the front door of the Merrion and turn left, go through the lights, you're in Ely Place. It's difficult to drive there because it changes direction, but if you're on foot. So the Merrion, by perspective, is down here. But Lau lived at number 20 Ely Place, and in fact, you can see his letterbox lot today still has McDonald Reed on it. And I'll be coming back to Ely Place because this actually is a very cool little street of Dublin. So who were these men? This is the pictures that I have found, and I'm going to read out to you some more detailed information about these two men now. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Laurence Ambrose Waldron first. So he was born at Ridge Hall, which is a very big property right on the border of Ballybrack and Killiney, to a wealthy Catholic Tipperary family, and came to be a well-regarded Dublin stockbroker, patron of the arts and nationalist MP. His career as a stockbroker was hugely successful, joining the profession in 1881. In 1896, he joined the directorate of the Dublin United Tramways Company and eventually became chairman. He succeeded James McCann, both as the chairman of the Grand Canal Company and as a member of Parliament for the seat of St Stephen's Green in the nationalist interest. He was also a director of the Dublin Gas Company, a commissioner of national education, a member of the Senate of National University, and on the governing body of UCD. He also served on the boards of the Dublin and Kingstown Railway, becoming chairman of the Kingstown Railway, and the Great Southern and Western Railways of Ireland. He was a governor of the National Art Gallery, a trustee of the National Library, and a commissioner of charitable donations and bequests. And when he left politics in 1910, he was made, he was sworn of His Majesty's Privy Council in Ireland in 1911. There's a wonderful resource online called the Dictionary of Irish Biographies, and that provides a little bit more colour to just a whole bunch of titles that he was involved in, but clearly, a very busy man. His friends included literary figures such as Oliver St John Gogarty, George Moore, Thomas Bodkin, and John Synge, and they knew him as Larky. He was renowned as a raconteur and an Epicurean, a collector of books and art. He immersed himself in the literature of the Celtic Revival. His sumptuous home on Killiney Hill reflected his literary and artistic tastes and became a regular haunt for many of Dublin's artistic community. He supported Home Rule, and in March 1904 was returned as the MP for St Stephen's Green in the by-election caused by the death of James McCann. He retained his seat in the January 1906 general election, but did not contest the general election in January 1910. Art historian Nicky Gordon-Bowe says, throughout his life, Waldron accumulated considerable wealth and a notorious reputation for his lavish entertaining at his sumptuously furnished and book-lined house overlooking Killiney Bay. His guests at dinner included the cream of artistic, legal and literary worlds at the time. James Joyce once wrote, "A lucky person might have found Provost Mahaffey, T.M. Kettle and Hugh Lane at one of his dinners, for he was a connoisseur in talk even more than in pictures, books or wine." Indeed, Marino became the convivial meeting place for a well-educated circle of Dublin professionals whose erudite members were wittily entertained over Epicurean feasts in his book-lined rooms amidst exquisite Chippendale Revival furniture made by contemporary Dublin cabinet maker James Hicks and Waldron family silver and paintings. Walter Starkey, who grew up at Undercliff, which is a house in Killiney, Walter Starkey called him Dublin's fattest man. And this perhaps is not a photograph he'd want shared. But I found this in the Bodkin papers at Trinity, and I suspect that this is his cousin, Lau, his architect buddy, who did all this work on his office on Anglesey Street and on Marino. And I think this might be his other cousin, Wilfred Fitzgerald, who was one of the executors of his will. He was a bachelor when he died, and his niece and his cousin were executors. Waldron and his famous dinner parties are known to have inspired poetry by Oliver St John Gogarty, and the odd quote, which I'll read out to you, one on Wigs on the Green. But so Gogarty wrote a 22-verse poem, and only a couple of verses were published in Gogarty's biography. And I've since found in Joseph Hone's papers about 6 lines. But I found the full poem, 22 verses, at Trinity College, and that's going to be in the book. So I won't read it to you because it's very long, but it's pretty cool. So this is a book called Wigs on the Green, which is, you know, all about the members of the St Stephen's Green Club. But this is quite a nice little quote about him. One member, Laurence Waldron MP, known to his wide circle of friends as Larky, became in 1912 the first patron of the young stained glass artist Harry Clarke, and remained so until his death in 1923. It was through him that the latter was introduced to many of his other customers and patrons. Waldron was by all accounts a larger-than-life figure in more senses than one. George Moore referred spitefully to his obscene bulk, but Gogarty painted kindly a picture of the man. I admit that Larky is a substantial man. He weighs 400 pounds and over. But then he is a stockbroker to the Catholic Church. Larky has to do the sums for the bishops and the archbishops and invest money for the little sisters of the poor. He lives sumptuously in his beautiful house on Killiney Hill. Yes, Larky is a great fellow in every sense. He sits in his office on Anglesey Street with 2 telephones and 4 mantelpieces by Bossy. He wears a skull cap of black silk topped by a large pink rhododendron. He hasn't seen his feet in years. Now, I was intrigued by this quote by George Moore, and I managed to find the quote in George Moore's book, From Hail and Farewell. This got published in 1911, and I'll read it to you now. So it talks about him and one of his mates called Thornley Stoker. Now, Thornley Stoker is better known as the brother of Bram Stoker, the famous author of Dracula, but he was a very, very famous surgeon at the time. And in fact, George Moore apparently used to be over dining at his house, and he'd say, "Oh, a new painting or a new sideboard. Was that a gallbladder or was that a, you know?" So he'd you know, just love these are men that just, you know, really embraced the artistic world and loved buying and supporting the Celtic revival. So Thornley Stoker rarely misses Grafton Street between 4 and 5. I should certainly catch sight of him hopping about a silversmith's like an old magpie, prying about the spoons and the forks, and the immodest bulk of Larky Waldron waiting for him outside, looking into the window. Now, Thornley Stoker lived on Ely Place. So I was just telling you that Lau lived at 20 over here. This is half of Thornley Stoker's Georgian mansion. It's 7 windows wide, and it looks straight down Hume Street to St Stephen's Green. And I also believe he refused to move to electric lights. He preferred the ambience of gas lights in his dinner parties. But this was his home. Now, further down the street on the left is the Royal Hibernian Academy, and that's where Gogarty lived. Gogarty sold his Georgian terrace and got knocked over for where the RHA is. Obviously the RHA is bigger than just his terrace, but his terrace formed part of that. And George Moore lived opposite the RHA. So there was a lot of stuff going on just near him. Now, his friend and neighbour at Killiney Hill, Joseph Home, so he was a publisher, and his family built many houses, one of which was Palermo, South Hill, and also Temple Hill. Now, his papers are at UCD, and he has written an 11-page essay about Larky, and he says that his physical resemblance, his physical resemblance was to King Edward VII, although in real life Waldron was shorter in stature and much fatter. But he had the same shaped head and the same shaped beard. It was also thought that Waldron carried himself with the air of a man accustomed to deference, which perhaps also struck the likeness. The effect was sufficient to cause him, during a motor tour of England, to be mistaken for the monarch travelling incognito. And apparently Dr. William Starkey, who lived at Undercliff, just nearby Temple Hill, they were doing driving around England, stopped at a hotel in Penzance, and the proprietor pulled him aside to say in hushed tones, "Could this be him?" Which I think is quite amusing. Ned O'Connor, a former station foreman at the Killiney Ballybrack station, tells the story. Local law has it that Waldron used to read his newspaper on the train each morning on his way into town, but that at one particular morning he left the paper on the train. A wide-awake newspaper boy at Westland Row Station, which is now Pierce Station, saw him without a paper and tried to get him to buy one, and Waldron gruffly refused him. Minutes later, the newsboy saw his chance to get even, as a cabman was trying to manoeuvre the oversized Waldron into a cab, asking him, "Where to, sir?" The newsboy quickly quipped, "For God's sake, get him to the Rotunda fast." So for those that don't, if you're Australian, the Rotunda is the maternity hospital. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about Waldron's political career now. Busy with his stockbroking business and his many board positions, Waldron was approached by the Nationalist Party to stand for a vacancy created by the death of James McCann in the seat of St Stephen's Green in 1994. Letters to the Irish Nationalist Party leader John Redmond at the time indicate that Waldron was reluctant to stand in light of his work commitments. He'd just taken over the chairmanship of the Grand Canal Company, which had also come to him in light of James McCann's sudden death of influenza, and also because the London climate has a frightful effect on his health. Fellow nationalist John Dillon was very supportive of Waldron's candidacy, as outlined in a letter to Redmond by John Dillon's wife, Elizabeth, sharing with Redmond of her husband's lifelong friendship with Waldron, and that they both gave their most unqualified admiration for his character as a candidate for the party. Now, Elizabeth Dillon's diaries have been published, and it's quite an interesting read, but in it she credits herself as the person who first conceived of Waldron as the best person to stand while her husband was overseas. According to fellow Nationalist MP John Muldoon, it was Archbishop William Walsh's personal appeal to Waldron that induced him to come forward in the end. It's believed that when Waldron's candidacy for the by-election was announced, his campaign soon gathered momentum, receiving public support from leading trades, including Corrigan and Kennedy, representing the licensed vintners, as well as cheers and a standing ovation when he entered the Dublin Stock Exchange. Waldron acknowledged Redmond's support on the 3rd of March in a telegram, noting that he will give as full an adhesion to Home Rule in the same words as the late James McCann in an address. Though like McCann, Waldron didn't actually take the National Party pledge and remained independent. Waldron's win was a majority 600 votes, which made Waldron, according to Elizabeth Dillon, the most popular man in Dublin this minute. And she goes on to reflect, "We could not have carried the seat with an extremist, and I believe that Waldron will be a great acquisition to the party. Husband John is delighted. Catholic Unionist in the division, except two." Waldron's obituary states that he was an independent nationalist seeking relief for the overtaxation of Ireland. And true to this, soon after Waldron entered the House of Commons, he made his first of only two statements in the House on Ireland's proportional taxation whilst debating the 1904 Finance Bill. Waldron retained his seat in 1906 but did not contest the next election in January 1910, citing increasing business demands as the cause of his retirement from politics. Perhaps it was also his health. It's little wonder that his obituary, written a couple of weeks after he passed, calls him a silent but amused attendant at its debates, because I don't think he spoke that much. But as I had mentioned before, he was appointed to the Irish Privy Council after he left politics. Despite having left the House of Commons, he did continue to follow politics, and he became Redmond's stockbroker. So he invested Redmond's money in companies like the London and the Western Railway Company, Arthur Guinness Son and Company, British American Tobacco, Southern and Western Railway, Canadian Pacific, Northern Railway Island, and Whisky Blenders E&J Burke Limited. So you could say a diversified portfolio of growth stocks of the day. But following the Easter Rising, he sent Redmond a letter. This is in the National Library. I'll read it out to you because his handwriting is actually quite difficult to read. "My dear Redmond, I cannot let the briefest letter go without sending you a line to say how glad I am that you have got back to your pure mountain air from the poisonous miasma of Westminster." Now, when he talks about the pure mountain air, I believe they're talking about the Wicklow Mountains. He had a shack which used to belong to Parnell. "You must have had the most troublesome and uncomfortable time ever since the Rising, and while every decent man thought of you with high esteem and felt for the horrible annoyance which the events of that week must have caused you, it was recognised generally by both your friends and foes that your sole thought was for the interests of the country. I certainly do believe, although for reasons with which I will not trouble you, I was much opposed to the Lloyd George settlement. I'm going away next week, but I hope to be home by the middle of September. If about that time anything should take you to Dublin, I wish you would come and dine and sleep here. Yours sincerely, Laurence Waldron. Kind regards to Mrs. Redmond. I was glad to hear your brother is all right." Isn't that great? What a nice guy. I've since been in touch with Waldron. Waldron didn't have any kids, but his niece inherited the house and she promptly sold it. I think they were moving to Kenya with her husband's work. So she sold the house to the Woods family, and Woods was a friend of Larky's. And in fact, Walter Starkey, as a 10-year-old, was invited to these big Sunday lunches, and he's written a wonderful description of these events as a 10-year-old sat at a little sidecar, side table to the main event. But the family have, the niece's granddaughter I've been in touch with. Unfortunately, she couldn't come over from England for this presentation. But she's shared with me a series of really interesting letters that really speak more to just what a kindly man and thoughtful man he is. And they're letters from the absolute political divide in Westminster. So there's lots of letters from John Dillon. There's letters from Augustine Birrell, who was the Chief Secretary for Ireland and a part of the British Cabinet. And he resigned in disgrace after the 1916 Rising, and I think Larky must have written a similar letter to him, because there's a reply from Birrell thanking him for for contacting him, and you know, and he actually admits just how terribly it had all gone. He also received letters from John Ross, a Unionist MP for Londonderry, Tim Healy, a fellow Nationalist MP, who also compliments him in a letter that also says, oh, you got a compliment from Rupert Guinness, the second Earl of Ivy. You know, that's hard to get, you know, so really interesting kind of comments. Also, Tom Farrer, who was the Liberal Party, who represented the Liberal Party in the House of Lords, as well as letters from Horace Plunkett, who, although wasn't a politician, was a very successful businessman in Dublin. Okay, so I'm now going to talk a little bit more about Sir Robert Woods. The one thing that I didn't mention actually about Thornley Stoker is Thornley Stoker was the mentor of Sir Robert Woods, so much so that his firstborn son was called Thornley Stoker Woods. So this guy was on the board of the National Gallery with Thornley Stoker, and so was Sir Robert, but much later, in the 1920s, he had joined, and Larkey died in 1923. But they were friends, and this description of one of these famous lunches at Larkey's describes Sir Robert Wood being there. So we absolutely know with certainty that he was a regular at the house. Born in 1865, Sir Robert Woods was an ear, nose and throat surgeon, selecting the specialty while studying in Vienna. His medical leadership extended to important contributions in understanding the biophysics of cardiac function. In 1893, he opened his private practice at 39 Merrion Square, and is known to have mentored Oliver St. John Gogarty, who called Sir Robert a dexterous and masterly surgeon to watch. He was knighted in 1913 and awarded an honorary master's from Trinity College. This is a painting of Sir Robert that was done by Orpen, and I'm very grateful the Woods family are here today. So Sir Robert's grandson and great-grandsons, grandsons plural, and great-grandson are here. And I'm very grateful that they've given us permission to reproduce this Orpen painting so that it can hang once again in the house. And as part of my research, the National Gallery is doing a fabulous thing in progressively putting a lot of their archives online. And I found a letter by Orpen to his wife which says, Woods has paid. And here is drawn a little caricature of Sir Robert Woods, who was a very tall man, I believe, paying Orpen. And this sort of goes on to say, we can now pay Jenny and blah, 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 blah. So this is, but very nice to have a caricature of Sir Robert by Orpen. Okay, so I'll just go back to, he was the president of the Royal College of Surgeons from 1910 to 1912. Here he is having a cup of tea after having completed surgery on the surgical table, I think, which is a sign of the times. A committee member of the surgical section for nearly 10 years collectively, and an honorary professor of laryngology and otology at Trinity College from 1915 until he passed in 1938. His leadership in throat surgery in Dublin was recognised internationally, and this recognition led to his election as the president of the British Laryngological Society. He was also an honorary fellow of the American College of Surgeons. The Dictionary of Irish Biography, once again, just adds so much more colour. He was immensely popular with his professional colleagues. With his strong physique and piercing eyes and powerful intellect, he was a well-known figure around Dublin. In his manner, he was direct, but equally charming and generous, and had a keen sense of humour. Colleagues regarded him as fair-minded and tolerant of all points of view. He was an excellent host, though he preferred to listen and enjoy the company of his guests, rather than join in himself. He was a cabinet maker and modeller of some skill, spending much of his time in his studio after he'd scaled down his medical practice. Interested in collecting paintings and antique furniture, he also enjoyed music and was a member of the Couch Club and the Strollers Singing Club. A practical man, he invented a number of mechanical devices for use in surgery, and to reduce glare during operations, he replaced the standard white surgical dress with green. How about that? As president of the Royal Dublin Zoological Society, in 1925 he presented a number of animals to the zoo, following a visit to the Far East to see one of his sons who was a barrister in Malaysia. Nicky Gordon-Bow says, Sir Robert Woods was a contemporary and a friend of Waldron's. He was a knowledgeable collector, a connoisseur in the best Dublin professional tradition, as well as being a distinguished surgeon. He became an admirer of Harry Clarke's. He was also a talented sculptor and modelled little wax heads of many eminent Dublin friends, while his wife, who Harry designed a bookplate for, made rugs and carpets. Sir Robert's political career had concluded before he had purchased Marino in 1924, but his political background is really, well, I think relevant, first of all because it's a Dublin seat that he stood in, but also because of his strong friendship with Waldron and being a regular visitor at Marino while Waldron was living at the house. This is the kind of conversation that would have been around the table. The impact of the Easter Rising on the country had not been lost on Sir Robert. With his private medical rooms located at his home at 39 Merrion Square, he worked at a field hospital that had been set up to treat the injured next to his house at number 40. So here he is. Now, just to give you a bit of perspective, 39 and 40 are at the opposite end of where the National Gallery is, so it's just the other end of the square. Patients in this makeshift hospital were from both sides of the conflict. However, it was the death of his son Thornley in World War I's Flanders conflict in September 1916 which motivated him to enter politics, a measure to combat his grief from this tragic event. So his son, named after his mentor, was killed, and he had stood unsuccessfully as a parliamentary candidate for Dublin University in 1917 in a by-election, though was elected the following year in the general election with a vacancy created by Sir Edward Carson's transfer of his seat to Belfast. In past years, the representation of Trinity College at Westminster had been held exclusively by members of the legal profession, and this had become a matter of concern for the medical fellows and other academic staff at Trinity College. It's thought that this concern for a lack of Irish medical representation was the reason for Sir Robert's successful election rather than his independent political persuasion. So this seat was considered to be traditionally unionist, but he was a much more broad-minded politician than a traditional unionist. In January 1919, when the first Dáil convened at Dublin's Mansion House, Sir Robert was entitled as a member of the Westminster Parliament from an Irish constituency to attend. None of the unionist MPs did attend, though he was the only unionist MP courteous enough to formally decline the offer to attend and wrote a formal letter. His contributions to parliamentary proceedings in Westminster were more numerous than Waldron's, but that's not hard. And when he did speak, his contribution was considered to be progressive and fair-minded. His contributions extended to the gratuities of naval medical officers, equal opportunity for education grants of Irish ex-servicemen, adequate representation for Ireland on the Nurses Board, and numerous public health issues and matters of public interest. In 1920, he pointed out that the King's Writ no longer ran in Southern Ireland, and in 1921 he objected to Commander of the British Forces in Ireland, General Macready's demand for information from hospital doctors about the wounded men under their care. As a result of this, the military order was never carried out. In July 1921, Sir Robert took part in the Mansion House Conference convened by Eamon de Valera, which was instrumental in bringing about a truce to hostilities between Republican and British forces. Following a speech by King George V at the opening of the Northern Parliament in Belfast, an invitation was issued by the British Prime Minister to Sir James Craig and Eamon de Valera to attend a conference in London for the purpose of exploring the utmost possibility of a settlement to the Irish question. Before responding to that invitation, de Valera sought to meet Unionist leaders on the island of Ireland and sent a letter to each. And this is Sir Robert's letter. So Mr Craig, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, refused to attend, but the Southern Unionist representatives, Lord Middleton, Lord Maurice Dockrell, Sir Robert Woods and Andrew Jepson did attend. So this meeting on the 4th of July was instrumental in bringing about the truce which ultimately led to the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Once the Irish Free State Agreement Act in 1922 became law on the 31st of March that year, Sir Robert left politics as his constituency ceased to be represented in the House of Commons. Okay, so here's the next bit. Who is Harry Clarke? Now, who am I as an Australian to be talking about Harry Clarke, really? So, now, I've just got to try and manoeuvre. I do have a little, is it going to work? I have a little sort of montage planned. Of course, it's not going to work. There it is. Okay, so I'm just going to read out what other people say about Harry Clarke, who are much more qualified than me. Harry Clarke is an Irish artist known internationally for his illustration and stained glass work. Born in 1889, he died very young in 1931 at the age of 42 from tuberculosis. Experts say he's considered the vanguard of the visual manifestation of the much better known literary Celtic revival, using Irish symbolism to visually express his complex imagination. Nicky Gordon-Bow says his skill and vision in glass have never been equalled and provides a bridge to the masterpieces of the medieval cathedrals. His exquisite ability to depict the unspeakably gruesome and the ethereally beautiful is unparalleled. His work is considered to be fundamentally arts and crafts ideology fused with a Celtic revivalist spirit, seeking expression in a modern idiom during a key period of Ireland's history. George Russell said in The Irish Statesman in 1929, he might have been incarnated from the dark side of the moon. Harry Clarke is one of the strangest geniuses of his time. And how did these three men know each other? Well, Nicky Gordon-Bow supposes that it was through the Belvederian school magazine, and that Larky, as an old boy of Belvedere College, had seen it and had come to his attention that way. Now, Harry could have met. It's presumed generally that that Larky was intrigued with his work and invited him to one of his Sunday lunches, and that's where he met Sir Robert Wood. And Nicky's work talks about how the first letter that she had, record that she had, was from 1913, but one of Sir Robert's grandsons has a postcard that had been drawn by Harry Clarke to Sir Robert, which is 1912. So we don't really know, do we, how they met. But I mean, a man stroking a fish, who doesn't need a pet fish? Isn't that great? So we know that Harry met most of his future patrons at the house, including Joseph Hone, who published a lot of his Dublin illustrations, and neighbours and friends of Waldron's like solicitor Sir John O'Connell and Sir Bertram Windle, both of whom were instrumental in Harry Clarke being commissioned for the Hone and Chapel work, which is down at, or was then Queen's College, but now UCC. And Nicky Gordon-Bow says, Harry was attractive, articulate, intelligent, well-read and quick to learn. Waldron was clearly impressed by Harry's talents, commissioning from him both illustrated and stained glass works, and they soon became firm friends. He must have been amazed and amused, not to say educated, at lunch events at Marino. Although he was shy at first in company, Harry became a popular and witty conversationalist and a regular favourite among Waldron's friends, and soon became one of Waldron's inner circle. Now, I'm going to show you a few things that we know are connected to Harry Clarke in the house. There's a beautiful domed little entry porch in the house, and I found this in the Irish Architectural Archive, and this is a drawing by Lau, the architect cousin, who had drawn and obviously sort of supposed that perhaps Larky's family crest, the Waldron family crest, could go in there. This is a more resolved drawing that Lau did, and this is the result. And Nicky Gordon-Bow documents this little face, this little sun glowing out, and I just want to make sure that I don't forget any points here. This is a lantern which used to hang in that porch with a matching little sun on the base of the lantern. Now this six-sided lantern is just beautiful. It's got images. He's drawn images of the zodiac signs along it. So two each panel. And on the opposite side of this, there's an intricate design with LAW. So we know that this lantern was commissioned by Waldron and sold with the house. And it's now with the Woods family. Now, I found this in the National Library. This is two-panel. We know that Nicky Gordon-Bow records that there were 4 lanterns that were done for Larky's townhouse in the city, but no one knows where they are. But this is some drawings in the National Library of 2 panels of those that he had done, and the level of detail, that he's actually giving direction on what colour goes where and everything. It's actually really very beautiful. This is a very small, like it would be as big as your hand, window by Harry Clarke in the stairwell, the main stairs at our house, facing north. So this is Larky Waldron's family crest with the dragon on top, the 3 bulls, and spectre merigendo, which means you will be judged by your actions. What I'm going to point out to you here is what's in the background. So he does interesting things in the negative space of his work, and this looks like little wriggly lines. Nicky Gordon-Bow calls it unravelled knitting, which I think is a perfect description of it. But it's a device that he uses a lot, and is really very distinct and interesting. He also created a bookplate for Larky Waldron. You can see here the crest again with the dragon, the bullhead, spectre merigendo. It's although it doesn't look anything like Larky, he's a very fat man. And Nicky supposes that this bookshelf, he's written all the names of all the books that he loved to borrow from Larky's library in here, big ornate frame with Laurence Waldron down the side. Now, we don't know if Larky ever used this bookplate. Perhaps he didn't like it, but and Nicky does also state that that Harry did a bookplate for Lady Margaret Woods. Now, the Woods family had been very generous in sharing with me a memoir of one of Sir Robert's granddaughters who grew up or spent the majority of her summers in the house. And she describes the bookplate in this memoir. Unfortunately, the Woods family don't have a copy of this bookplate. I really hope one day someone opens a book, amongst the family and finds it. But there's this beautiful description. So this little granddaughter obviously has no idea who Harry Clarke is, but she says, "The artist sat in the hall and drew the open door and framed in the doorway the magical sweep of the mountains." Now this is a painting by Sir Robert Wood of the view from the front door of the house of Bray Head and the Wicklow Mountains with the Sugarloaf up here. So this was this vacant block of land which the Australian government unfortunately doesn't own. But that's the unencumbered view that the house would have had over Killiney Bay. He also drew a beautiful Christmas card. I believe that Harry Clarke, like each year, made a Christmas card. Would that be right, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So I don't know if he made this for Larky or if he made it for himself for that year. But here is Bray Head and the Wicklow Mountains in the background. This beautiful, Nikki Gordon-Bow calls it, I'll just read it out because she says it so well. It's called the Angel of Peace, an attenuated angel setting free a haloed dove of peace while hovering over Killiney Bay. And you can see there's a miniature nativity scene just underneath Sorrento Terraces here. There's three wise men and Mother Mary and baby Jesus and Harry Clarke's signature at the bottom there. I mean, isn't that incredible? It's just incredible. So these are some works which Harry did for Waldron, and we know that Nikki, and if you've got her book, The Life and Work of Harry Clarke, she goes into a huge amount of detail with regards to the profile of this lady being very similar to a design in the window of St Gobnate at the Honan Chapel. So perhaps he made it at the same time because he was working on it in about 1915. But this gives you a good idea of just how valuable his work is. This is a small piece that's only 14 centimetres wide in diameter, but it sold in 2014 for £37,000. And this one, another very small piece, which sold in 2014 for £8,600. So these were all inherited through the Waldron family. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about Waldron's death and what Harry Clarke had done with Lau, the infamous architectural cousin. So the Irish Architectural Archive, I found a 1922 drawing and spec for a granite plinth to go in the garden, and here it is in the garden. So as per one of the earlier slides that I showed of that sort of patchwork garden rooms, these are different garden rooms off these beautiful pebbled pathways. And on there is chiselled beautiful poetry which has inspired the line here that Harry Clarke drew for Waldron's mass card. Again, Bray Head and the Wicklow Mountains, this beautiful view, Larky's garden across a book, a bunch of flowers, a extinguished I should say, candle. Okay, I'm going to read the poem that's on, and I mean obviously I think Larky knew that he was unwell. It did say in his obituary that he'd worked from home for the last year, and his butler, Brown, the butler, had been instructed upon his death to go and announce it to all his inner circle and go and knock on the door of everyone. But here's the poem. Fade flowers, fade nature, will have it so. 'Tis what we must in our autumn do, and as our leaves lay quiet on the ground, the loss alone by those that love them found, so in the grave shall we as quiet lie, missed by some few that loved our company. And here we are, missed by those few who loved his company, which I think is really sweet. Bodkin and Harry Clarke, I've found some letters between them in Trinity College where they were refer to him as the great man. So he was an older generation. He was probably half a generation older than Waldron and Harry Clarke. He was introducing him to his rich circle of friends, and Harry was getting a lot of commissions for €200,000, and is now a part of the collection at Ballinahitch Castle, and is owned by Dennis O'Brien. And Gary knows Dennis, and Dennis and his lovely wife have been kind enough to allow us to reproduce this painting so it can again hang at Marino or Abbey Lea. And I think I know why Harry Clarke would have really liked this painting, because there's so much going on in it. I mean, the thing about Harry Clarke's work is you've got to look at it and look at it. There's more to it. There's so much detail. And when this, I mean, obviously it's a green bar, La Beauvais Vert, but this guy looks as though he's just looked up, you've opened the door and you're interrupting the conversation that's happening here. And, these look like people that have worked very hard, perhaps in the fields all day, and are having a quiet cup of tea. But your eye is, even though the bottom third of the painting's just floor, your eyes are drawn through to the maid just trying to catch the last chapter of the book before it gets busy. And this guy's looking pretty relaxed by the bar, so he could be drunk or he could just be relaxed. I'm not sure. But we also know that Harry Clarke gifted this in his will to his best friend Laurence Robinson, who was a famous playwright. Laurence Robinson used to live at Sorrento Cottage, which is a beautiful pink little cottage just next to the Sorrento Terraces in Dorking, which is now owned by a very famous guitarist called The Edge. So, this painting's been in some places. We've also, this is the glass house at the back of the house. We do a lot of entertaining in this beautiful Turner glass house. But it got renovated in 2010, and the ambassador at the time had wanted to throw this on the skip. And our groundskeeper said, maybe I'll just put it in one of the old sheds. And anyway, we pulled it out. And you can actually see David's face through here, because I'm showing David, what do we do with this door? What is it? And is it valuable? So David, if anyone has any questions, obviously David's the right person to ask, but I'll give a layperson summary. This is Victorian glass, obviously with broken panels in it. It needs a lot of work. But the top half here, in that negative space, are little tells that make you think this could have been fixed by Harry Clarke. So there's all these little, what do we call it, unravelled knitting, dotted through the negative space here. There's quite modern sort of little dots and stars dotted through here. So the Australian government, does intend to restore this. But how long does that take? Because governments move pretty slow. So we're quite keen. Gary's keen for Margarita as a part of the Harry Clarke's museum project. If this is available, if the Australian government isn't doing anything with it, that we want it to be available for everyone to see before I think they intend to turn it into a light box, but who knows when that'll be. And so the last but not least is Queen's. And Queen's is, probably the most magical of everything that Harry Clarke made for the house. So before I sort of show you the glass itself, I'm just going to describe it to you so you can sort of get a bit of an idea about what you're going to see. So this was commissioned by Waldron in 1917, and they're absolutely tiny. The miniaturisation of this work is unbelievable. And if you're interested in it, these were sold at auction in '97 for a huge sum. So then, and they're in private hands, and Paddy Bowe tells me it's somewhere on the continent, so we don't know who owns them, and we've tried through Christie's, who sold them, to get in touch with the owners, and they're interested in engaging. So if you want to see anything like it, there is a tiny little walnut cabinet in the National Gallery in the stained glass room that they have, which was acquired from Thomas Waldron, and that panel was made at the same time Thomas was helping Harry do research on some of the queens, and asked him if he could do one for him, and he did. So that if you want to sort of see the jewel light colours are incredible, but it looks like it's 3D. It's just insane. So as in Synge's poem, Clarke's panels depict beautiful and powerful Celtic European women. Nikki Gordon-Bowe says, trapped within their rich finery, within the rich finery of their elaborate theatrical costumes, their affected expressions hint at feelings of vanity, lust, envy, and even moral and physical degeneracy. The legendary queens glide past on a theatrical stage strewn with decorative flowers, cushions, urns, birds of paradise and huge butterflies. Each queen named in Synge's poem is fantastically depicted, whether exotically beautiful, pockmarked, villainous or alluring. The first and the last windows depict an image of the poet reading a love story about Ireland's queens, which bookends the series. And in the first panel, he's unfurling a scroll over her dress, and you wouldn't believe it, but written on this tiny little scroll, it says, "This and the following 8 stained glass panels illustrating Queens by J.M. Synge were designed and executed by Harry Clarke for Right Honourable Laurence Waldron, September 1917. Like, it's minute. So Nikki says, the Queen's panels were clearly created to delight Waldron and his literary circle with their myriad of references to art history and the richness and complexity of their ornamentation. In the context of the early 20th century Dublin, the imagery provides amusing and clever interjections into a metaculture of European art and literature. The National Library has letters between Harry Clarke and Bodkin from this time. There's one dated the 4th of March 1917 where Clarke describes how much he's enjoying working on the project, but he asks for Bodkin's help on researching Queen Villain and Queen Ronsard. Famous Dublin cabinet maker James Hicks, who actually made this beautiful walnut cabinet in the National Gallery, if you go and have a look at the Bodkin piece, he created a wrought iron frame to Harry Clarke's specification in order to display the works, and I assume that that's how they are displayed today. And so this is the library in which they were lived in. So they were like a processional frieze at eye level in these tiny little windows. Now, these are not photographs from Waldron's time. These are photographs from the Woods' time. But given that they were friends and obviously bibliophiles, there was apparently more than 11,000 books in this library. And you can see that the light is coming from this side. Now, I'm going to be showing you a photograph taken from this perspective. But I'll show you a photograph that's quite similar to this perspective, so you can just sort of get an idea of where these panels were originally installed. So, so the same fireplace, no bookshelves. I've managed to find out that the bookshelves were not removed by the Australian government because it would have been terrible, but they were removed by Lady Talbot de Malahide, who owned the house before the Australian government bought it. She actually had them removed and took them to her next house in Shankill, the next suburb down. Which, anyway, one of her godchildren have shown me a photograph. They actually have it in Oxford in their land room. So, it's nice to see that they're still getting used more than 100 years later. But this is the window, and there were 9 of these panels. So these were read at eye level here. And this is another perspective of the window. It's a very deep, beautiful bay window. Okay, let's get into it. So here's this scroll, by the way, and I'll just point out, this is this unravelled knitting again in a skirt. 7 dog days we let pass, naming queens in Glen McNass, all the rare and royal names, wormy sheepskin yet retains, Etan, Helen, Maeve and Fan, golden Deirdre's tender hand. Bert the Bigfoot, sung by Villon, Cassandra, Ronsard, found in Leon. Queens of Sheba, Meath and Connaught, coif with crown or gaudy bonnet. Queens whose finger once did stir men. Queens were eaten of fleas and vermin. Queens men drew like the Mona Lisa, or slew with drugs in Roman Pisa. We named Lucrezia Crivelli and Titan's lady with amber belly, queens acquainted in learned sin, Jane of Dury's slender shin. Queens who cut the bogs of Glana, Judith of Scripture and Gloriana. Queens who wasted the East by proxy or drove the ass cart, Tinker's doxy. There's even a little donkey in here. Yet these are rotten, I ask their pardon, and weave the sun on the rock and garden. These are rotten, so you're the queen of all who are living or have been. So the next few slides, this is the end of my presentation, and I'm not going to read out, listen, Nikki Gordon-Bowe's got some fantastic insight on each of these panels and what they mean, because they're so full on that you just want to look and actually have someone who knows what they're talking about tell you a little bit more. There's a couple of things just with regards to this particular one that I want to point out that Nikki's referred to in her research that directly relate to the garden. So first of all, I want to draw your eye to this garden stake here. There's actually a little fairy unfurling herself on the top of that garden stake. And here is the Wicklow Mountain. And Nikki Gordon-Bowe supposes that these sort of discs that they're sitting on here relates to the patchwork garden at the back of the house. But I've managed to find in the Bodkin papers at Trinity College a photograph from the 1924 sales brochure when his niece put the house up to sale. Waldron's niece put the house up to sale. Now these are these garden stakes, which I found when we asked the gardener to remove a hedge. They were hidden in a hedge, but they're still there. And a part of a garden plan, long-term garden plan, to have them fully restored and back in the garden. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm more than welcome. And every couple of minutes, I'll just sort of click through so you can sort of get a little bit more insight into just how incredible these drawings are. Well, drawings, glass, it's just beautiful. Does anyone have any questions? It's easy. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.